So what I want to do tonight is just basically walk through the process of doing what we're calling a text report, which is the kind of assessment item that's being used for assignment 2 and assignment 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the process of actually doing the task. Now I'm cheating, I'm not going to be using one of the passages that I'm going to be marking. That would be easy for me, but would make it all too easy for you as well. So I'm going to pick up just a very short paragraph out of Matthew 23. The reason I did that is that I actually did a little exegesis, a sort of sample exegesis of Matthew 23 several years ago now for a bunch of students I was teaching, and it's one of the templates that you'll see showing up from time to time. So I knew I already had some background work there that I could tap into easily enough. The other thing, of course, is that it also means you'll be able to see the difference between an exegesis by looking at this example from a few years ago, and the difference between that and a text report, which is going part of the way into the exegetical process, but it's only going a couple of steps. So it's not a complete exegesis. So those of you that are doing Intro to New Testament, have been doing Intro to Old Testament in first semester, will be doing Pentateuch or Prophets or whatever, Paul, over the summer, we'll be able to pick up the difference between a text report, which is not much more than a word study and a few parsing and look at the context, and the larger exegetical process. So by me using a sample from Matthew 23, you'll be able to compare those two different outputs. So there's some similarity in process, but there's also some differences in terms of the outcomes, okay? So let me go into it. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is I'm going to open my Accordance Bible software, and I'm just going to check that I've got open the windows that I'm likely to need for some of the processes. Now I could get to these tools just by sort of navigating to them as I need them, but let me put up the things that I'm going to use at this stage. So I'm not going to worry about my notes, I don't need that for this purpose. I'll probably leave the NET notes because they're actually quite a useful tool. Let me get the... Here we go, nope. Just want to shrink that down a bit. What I will want to have up, I want to make sure I've got, say, some commentaries open. So I'm not going to need the photo guide for this purpose. I'm probably not going to need the timeline. So rather than just have it taking up real estate on the screen, I'll get rid of that. I'm probably not going to need a map, so I can get rid of the map as well. Okay. Now in this case, I'm not likely to need the Anchor Bible Dictionary, but I'll leave it there just so it's got something there. So what am I going to need? Well, for sure, I'm going to want some commentaries. Commentaries come under reference tools. So, and I'm obviously doing Matthew, so that's New Testament. So I'll open the Word Biblical Commentary. You notice it's now straight away, it's opened a tab over there, up here. I will also go and open up the Hermeneia Commentary. Now the Hermeneia Commentary, well, it's all in one volume. When we get into it, we'll see that Ulrich Lutz's commentary on Matthew is 3 volumes thick. Okay, we're obviously going to be would only be tapping into a tiny bit at the end. And I can also open the New Interpreter's Bible if I want to, because I've got that there if I want it. Okay. The other tools that I'll go into, which will be things like mounts and BDAG, I'll get to those just by triple clicking when I'm on the word that I want to look up. So I won't worry about opening them at this stage. Then I just click on the library icon. The way I did that was just to click on the library icon to show the library, click on it again to hide the library. Same process with instant details. Click on it to bring up the window with the instant details. Click on it again for the instant details to disappear. So they're just on-off kind of toggles, okay? Now at this stage I'm just going to go back into the text, and I'm going to put in the passage that I'm going to be looking at, which is Matthew 23, verses 23 to 24. So it's just one paragraph within that chapter of Matthew's Gospel, okay? So we can have a bit more of this. So we've got the Greek on one side and the English on the other. Now if I want the Greek on this side, I just drag it across, okay? So there's no problem. I tend to, this will be different in a couple of weeks' time, but I tend to think left to right. what I'm reading. So I've just moved the Greek across to the left-hand side. Okay, so that'll make my brain focus more on the Greek, because I will tend to look at the left-hand side of the screen automatically because I'm so used to reading in a European language. Okay, so that's the passage. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, hypocritae, for you tithe the mint, the dill, and the cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat but swallow a camel. Okay? Why didn't Jesus have lots of friends? I don't understand why people thought he was a bit difficult to get on with sometimes. Okay, so what we're going to be doing, we're going to be looking at the word hypocrite for the word study shortly. So that's the word I've set us for this exercise in terms of the word study. And then I've identified 5 other words: grammates here, grammates, apodekatute, which is here, apodekatute, okay, and then elios, okay, and poiesai here, and then tufloi, okay. So there are 5 words which we will look at as we go through. Now, of course, as a good student, I've got my document all ready to go. So, and of course, I remembered to make sure that the footer has student name, student number, subject code, and page number. Hint, hint. Students don't always remember to do that. They think it's obvious whose essay it is. Okay. You can put in the header or the footer, and then it's just there for you. In fact, if you have a template that you use for essays, okay, because you're always going to use Times New Roman 12 point, double line spacing, blah, 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 margins of 3 mil on the left, 2.5 top, bottom and right, etc. You can just have a template for essays and just open up Save As, and away you go. Then everything is there, except you've got to change the subject code. Okay, and the subject code probably isn't that critical because the lecturer probably knows which subject they're marking. Okay, they may not know which student they're marking, but Okay, so what I've done is I've just set up I've just taken that information I posted out on Moodle. All right, so I'll make it a little bit bigger for our purposes. So on the front page, I've just got what the task is basically, Matthew 23, 23, 24, sample text report, and I've just copied across exactly the information that I put up on Moodle, just as a reminder to us as we go through the exercise, what we're needing to do. Okay, the word study, there's the word, hypocrite, and then the other 5 words, and we'll type the parsing in there. We'll work on the parsing together and see how we identify that from the software. And then we'll discuss the kinds of things you might put in for the interpretation. All right, and we can even go into my into EndNote and grab a couple of resources and look at how we'd format them to put them into the bibliography. All right. And along the way, we'll find ourselves doing some Greek accidentally as well. All right. So the first thing was, of course, to look at the what's going on in the surrounding area. We don't want to take this verse or this paragraph out of context. So we want to see what's there. Now, in this case, I remember that I had done this other exercise, and I knew that I had done a little section on the structure of the immediate context of these woes. So I just went and copied that across and then edited it slightly for this purpose. Okay. Now, one of the things I want to show you is there's not a lot of words there, as you can see. Okay. From there to there is not a lot of words, but it is 139. So when I say you've only got about 150 words to play with, that's about how much words you have to play with for structure. That's all you've got to do. You don't have to tell me how beautiful the sky is and how much you like Ulrich Lutz or anything else. I want some brief notes, something that demonstrates that you've got a sense of how this particular bit fits into the larger chunk. Because when you come back to make sense of it, you want to make sense of it as part of a larger whole not just on its own. So, for instance, if your exercise was to do a text report on the Lord's Prayer, okay, it would be important to note how the Lord's Prayer fits into the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, which you may or may not have ever noticed before, because the way we do preaching, we hardly ever pay attention to the context. We have liturgical sound bites, lectionary sound bites in church, okay? And you probably never get a sermon on the Lord's Prayer because we pray it. We don't exegete it, okay? But it would be important to note that the Lord's Prayer actually forms like the core of Matthew's version of the Sermon on the Mount. Everything leads up to it and then flows from it, and there's a structure. The Lord's Prayer has its own structure, but it's also part of a larger structure within Matthew 5, 6 and 7. Same thing here. So as you get to the end of Matthew's Gospel, he starts to build the tension up, as of course Mark does as well, but the tension builds because of the conflict between Jesus and the temple hierarchy in Jerusalem. And that sets the scene eventually for the arrest and the crucifixion. So this whole conversation, if you can call this a conversation, this section of condemnations by Jesus is Matthew setting the scene for why Jesus got into such deep trouble with the temple establishment and how they were just on different wavelengths. Now, and if you're doing a fuller exegesis, you'd notice that Luke has similar material, but it's not part of the Passion narrative. Luke has this stuff much earlier in the Gospel. Matthew has chosen to use it around the time of the lead up to the crucifixion, because it's part of Matthew's way of sort of illustrating why relationships were so deadly between Jesus and the temple authorities. Okay, so we're not asking the historical questions, when did Jesus say this? Like, which bit of Palestine was he standing in? And what was the date when he said these words? In Matthew's story, it's part of the final climax of antipathy. In Luke, it's part of an underlying tension that's there the whole way through. Okay? Historians could ask the other questions, but if we're reading Luke, we read his way of telling the story. If we read Matthew, we pay attention to Matthew's way of telling the story. So we understand that what Matthew's doing here, he's got 7 of these sort of prophetic denunciations, as the great prophet denounces 7 times, and there's a significant, 7, ding, 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 numbers should be, bells should be going off. Anything that happens 7 times, there's something prophetic, something symbolic going on here in terms of biblical numbers. Okay, so Matthew has arranged a series of sort of 7 sort of prophetic denunciations of the Pharisees and the scribes by Jesus. And the one we're looking at is number 4 in the list. So it's right in the centre of the 7. Now that doesn't mean it's going to be the most important. It may simply be number 4. It could be that number 7 is more important, or number 1, or they could all be equally important. Okay, but we start to notice the structural dynamics that verses 23 and 24 are part of a series of 7. That series of 7 is part of a larger chapter. That chapter is part of a section towards the end of the Gospel where the tension between Jesus and the religious authorities is ramping up to a critical point. Okay? So that's enough. And now, I've said many, many more than 150 words when I'm rabbiting on, okay? But when we're doing it for an essay, it's just got to be really succinct. You've just got to demonstrate that you've done the work, you know what's there, and you can describe it briefly. You'll come back to it later when you get to the interpretation. A lot of what I've just said, if I were doing this as a written-up essay, would probably come back in at this 4th section where we talk about interpretation. Because who are the people Matthew is most worried about at the end of the 1st century? It's the scribes and the Pharisees. They're the opponents of Matthew and his fellow church members. Okay? So yes, he's talking about Jesus and the Pharisees, but he's also talking about the guys in the synagogue across the road. Okay? It's not just it's not simply historical. There's a contemporary missional dimension to it as well. So you don't need to use very many words to have used up your 150 word budget for that part of the task. Okay, but as much as possible, see, by doing it that way, I've packed a lot of information in because I've just got the structural map there. I haven't said there are 7 sections, and if we put that in words, it takes longer. If I put it in a table or as a chart, I can pack more information in, but I'm not having to use up so much of my word count. And I've avoided having a footnote because I went to the APA style and just put Lutz 2005, page 92, and then there's no footnote stuff to worry about. Okay? That part's all right? We've got the night's hour, so we can take our time. I can always go back and edit the video if anybody says something they don't want. Being watched by the Archbishop or something. Okay. All right, so let's have a look at how we do the word study. Now, normally, if you're doing an exegetical task, you will have to decide which are the potential words you might want to look at in some detail. Okay, in the case of the assignment, you'll be given the word which you'll use for your word study. Okay, so I assigned myself and us the word hypokrites, basically, but in the inflected form that occurs in the text, hypocritai. Okay, which of course is the word hypocrite. You can probably pick that up straight away just from this is one of those Greek words which we haven't actually translated into English. We've simply taken the word into English and we transliterate it into English letters, but we don't translate the word. We simply have the word hypocrite. And hypocrite may or may not mean the same thing in English as it meant in ancient Greek, but we have taken that word and just imported it into English. Okay? And hypocritical and all the other forms of the word that go with it. So that's the word we want us to look at. So at this point I have to go back into my Bible software and I'm going to find the text here, and of course it's this word over here, so I'll make that a bit bigger for our purposes. Okay, hypocritai. So if I bring up the instant details, for instance, you can see straight away down the bottom of the screen, we get the really basic information about the word. Oops. Let me think there's a way of bringing this up the side. Yeah, okay, so this now is going to be up here for us, which may or may not be better. Get the little doobie here. Okay, so when I go under hypocrites, here we are. You'll get the instant details a bit higher up the screen. I tend to like them on the bottom, but that might be a bit easier for us with this layout. Okay. So the word as it occurs in the text is in bold type, hypocritai. That's the inflected form. In other words, that's inflected for number and for case. Okay, and it's not actually inflected for gender because it's a masculine noun, hypokrites. You might remember I've mentioned a couple of times that the nouns which end with tes, tau, eta, sigma, tend to be occupations or roles. So mathetes is a disciple and so on. Okay, ergotes is a worker, despotes is a ruler, despot. Okay, hypocrites is a hypocrite. Okay, but we're going to find that hypocrites doesn't basically mean hypocrite in ancient Greek. Okay, it basically means an actor. But that's not how it's used in the Bible. So there's a little note to self, okay? It's important to look at the etymology, as Mounts was saying last week, but etymology won't tell you the contextual significance of the word. And we're going to find as we get into the lexicons and so on, that within the biblical documents, it is always used in a negative sense. Never in the Bible is it used simply with the word actor. It's always a negative. It's always the nasty sense of the word. Oh, he's just pretending. He's faking it. He's acting. Not he's an actor, but he's faking it. See the slide in the semantic range between an actor is somebody who's not really and truly that person, but is pretending to be, and normally that's okay. Because in the context of going to the theatre, you don't expect Queen Elizabeth to come out on the stage and play the part of Queen Elizabeth. You expect an actress to do it. Okay? But if the actress tried to pass herself off as the Queen by driving up to Parliament at the opening of Parliament, then we'd have a problem. Okay? So the same person doing the same thing can be appropriate or inappropriate depending on the context. So we've got to know more than the etymology. We've actually got to know what's going on. What are the rules? How is this word used in this piece of literature, in this social context, in this particular place? Okay? So it's a noun. It's and we can see as we go through the details that we get with the instant parsing. It's a noun. It's masculine. It's vocative, which you might want to come back to, and it's plural. Now, what on earth is vocative? Well, it's a case. It's one of the cases. It's a case we don't bother to learn because it doesn't occur that often, and this happens to be one of the ones it does. We actually know a vocative quite well. We know the vocative for kyrios really well because we know kyrie eleison. Okay, and kyrie is the vocative form of kyrios. So vocative is when you're speaking to a person. And in English, it's sort of oldish English, but in Old English you'd often put an O in front of it. O Lord, O hypocrites, whatever, okay? So vocative is not the subject of the sentence, subject of the verb. Vocative is when you're actually you're going to address that person or that thing. So most of the time, the form of the vocative, the actual shape of the vocative is identical to the shape of the nominative. So the only way you can tell that this is vocative is because the way it's occurring in the sentence, because he's actually speaking to these people. Okay, you scribes and you Pharisees, hypocrites. And my guess would be, if we went back to grammatis, it will also be vocative, and we go to Pharisee, it's also vocative. Okay, because Jesus is saying, hey you, O scribes, O Pharisees, O hypocrites. Okay, now so if you're doing your parsing and you get vocative, it's vocative, what's vocative? Okay, well that's when you go back to your grammar, or for a second, just remind yourself what vocative means. There are some words like kyrios where the vocative is slightly different, and so it's kyrios, kyrie. And so in church we have the kyrie eleison. Lord, O Lord, have mercy. Kyrie, not kyrios or kyrion, kyrie eleison. Okay? So that's what we've got here. We've got a noun, it's masculine, it's vocative. It's a proper noun in the way it's, sorry, let's come back to hypocrite. And in this case it's plural, because if you remember your endings for those ace nouns, when you get down to the plural, it takes the normal alpha kind of ending. So this is normal, nominative, plural, ending in the A declension. Okay, and its very broad meaning is interpreter, actor, or hypocrite. Now I can remind myself how we do this. No. Okay, so I went option, click, and then I go onto the clipboard, and then I can go back to my Word file, and I can actually just paste that in. Okay, now it's ugly in terms of formatting, but I can change the formatting later. So all the details that were there in my accordance, by going holding down option, that brings up a little window. I then click on the little clipboard icon, that copies it to the clipboard on the computer, and I paste it into my Word document. If I want, and then I can change all of that, because it's all Unicode, I can change it all to Times New Roman, and straight away it starts to look better, and I can drop it all back to 12-point font, and then it just looks like I did it all myself.
Would you leave it in the bold font?
Oh, I can do whatever I want. I can change them as I want to. At this stage, I'm just putting the information across. Now, when I'm parsing it, I'm probably not going to actually. That is okay, because what I've done, I've set the options in accordance, so it gives me the parsing information in the sequence that I want the tags to appear. Okay, so what I would do there, I would have hypocrite, which is the format that's there in the text. What I would normally do myself if I was parsing, I'd have noun, masculine vocative plural of, and then I'd put in the lexical form, hypocrites. I don't need to have the etymology, that's over the top. And in this case, the inflected form, it means interpreter. In fact, it's plural, so I've got to make the interpreters, actors, hypocrites, because it's plural. Okay, and that's what we've got down the bottom here, hypocrites. And I might just make a note. This will be relevant to the next section. The vocative indicates the direct address by Jesus as he speaks. Okay, so I'm making a little note to myself about the significance of the fact that this word is vocative rather than nominative or accusative. Okay, if hypocrite was nominative, then the hypocrites would be the subject of whatever verb was in the sentence. Okay, in this case, they're the recipient of the address. They're the ones he's talking to. All right, now I don't need to have NRSV. That's just telling me New Revised Standard Version with Strong's numbers, so that's not going to be much use to me. For my essay, I'm not going to need to have. Well, actually, no, I've set up there citing its Strong or GK number, so there's the Strong's number. Okay. So I guess I could put Strong G 5273 hypocrites, and I'd probably this doesn't matter. I'd probably just put that out of bold into italics or something. Okay. So I've just made a rough note at the beginning, just with the really basic parsing that goes with that word. And I haven't. It's not. I mean, as it happens, I do understand what's going on there, but because of the software, I can copy information across, and then there may be some terms I need to look up to clarify what's evocative or whatever. Okay. So there you've got your very simple kind of. So I've got the part of speech, noun, and you can either do that. I would often do that by just putting it in capitals rather than bold. So noun, verb, adjective, whatever, and then masculine vocative plural. I don't bother typing masculine vocative plural in full, but it can be a bit too arcane to put MVP. Okay, it's probably better to put mask voc plot rather than MVP. I'll work it out eventually, but it's probably better to be a bit more informative. Remembering to save every time, of course. Very important to save your work on a regular basis. But nobody learns that until they lose something really important. Okay, so I've captured the basic information that's going to be available to me just by going to the instant details. But now I want to do a little bit of digging behind. I already know that Strong's reference number is Greek 5273, but I want to know things like how often does this word occur? Like, is it a common word? Is it a rare word? What's your guess with hypocrite? Rare? And what would qualify as rare? Out of the 63,000 words in the New Testament? Just a handful. All right. Have you done this before?
It just doesn't seem a common word, that too.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It's a word which is only going to occur in situations of conflict. Like, this is not something you put on your business card, Greg Jenks, hypocrite. You don't kind of hand that out. Thank you. You don't hand that out, do you? I mean, it's a word that belongs in a context where there's difficulty and tension, or it's a word that belongs in a theatrical context, and we're not reading the plays of Sophocles. Okay, so it's not a natural place to find references to actors and so on. So actually, you're right. We're going to find the word only occurs 17 times in the New Testament. Okay.
When you're doing this, is it only in, I sound naive, but only in the New Testament? It would be throughout the whole of the Bible? New Testament?
Okay, well, we tend to primarily talk about the New Testament when we're using Greek. However, I could set the search range so it's the Greek Bible, okay, not simply the Greek New Testament, because it could be interesting to see if the word hypocrites occurs in the Septuagint in the Old Testament, and twice apparently, okay, because there are references to games and amphitheatres and so on, okay.
They're both negative, actually.
And it's also negative there. That's interesting. Okay, so let's try that. So let's. I'm going to. Come back to here again. Hypocrite. Okay. So I'm going to go right click. So I've got to do it on the English. To use the keyword numbering, I've got to search on the English because I'm on the Greek. Keyword's not going to work. So I come across to hypocrite. Go right click. Search for key. Search for key number. It's going to open up a new window. So that's the window I was working on. Next to it is NRSV2. And what it's found is 17 times. Now that's in the New Testament because that's the range. If I go to my plus sign here, and it lets me see what the range is. And so it's searched all the text. But it's only searched the text of the Greek New Testament. Okay? I'd have to do a different search, set up the search differently to look for the occurrences in the Septuagint. Okay, so there's the 17. So the quick way to do those, I then have a quick look at the default analytics, and I can make that the whole window, so it's easier for me to see what's going on. So really, just flick through this in whatever random order they come up. So this word occurs 17 times, 13 in Matthew. So Matthew has a bit of a thing about this word. Okay, this is a Matthean favourite term. 17 times, 13 of them in Matthew. Only occurs once in Mark. And Mark is the primary source for Matthew. So, Matthew's really developed a minor theme from Mark into a major focus. And it only occurs 3 times in Luke. Okay, so if I was when I get to the interpretation stage, one of the things to note to self is this is a particularly Matthean buzzword. And I don't just mean Matthew, but the people Matthew's hanging out with, they use this language. This is language that means something to them because of the context they're in. Towards the end of the first century, with a Christian community that's trying to be Jewish and trying to be Jesus people at the same time, and they're not finding it easy, and they're not finding it hard to explain themselves to the Pharisees. And in that situation of conflict and ambiguity, allegations of hypocrisy are going backwards and forwards, possibly. That's the kind of exegetical thing that's going on in my head here. So that's one snapshot. Now, if I thought that was a particularly interesting table, I can just go right. Probably absolutely right. Yeah, I'd have to do that and copy it. And I could also, if I wanted just to print it, I could print it off and save it as a PDF or whatever, but let's not worry about that. Okay. So then when I go into Word, having actually selected something, I can paste it in. Okay, and then of course reformat it, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what else have we got? Let's go across the other side. This is just a hits graph. It'll just let you see in the range of the Bible as a whole, but only looking at the Greek New Testament for data. This is where we're going to find it. Well, we knew that already. Same thing, basically. There's only the one word being used here, referenced here. So these ones are not going to give us any differentiation. That's just giving us a sort of visual way of describing the differences. This is showing us how that one Greek word will be used 2 different ways in English, and it's just the difference between singular and plural. So in this case, there's nothing there of any sort of theological or linguistic significance. But sometimes you'll get a word which will the same word, say a word like, say, diakonos will be sometimes translated as servant or minister and so on, but it's the same underlying Greek word. Whereas in this case it's just hypocrite or hypocrites, so there's no big deal.
In the assessment of it, does it actually let you know that 6 of those times in Matthew will occur in the same chapter that we're looking at?
This will be this one probably, the concordance version of it, where it actually shows you exactly where they are. So here's the chunk from Matthew 23. So was it? Yeah. So 6 of the what we say 13 in Matthew, weren't they? 6 of the 13. So not only does Matthew go over the top with hypocrites, but half of the time when he's using that word, it's in this chapter.
And then on the chapters on one side.
And then, so indeed. So chapter 22 and chapter 24, which again is where the tension is really high. So this is classic Matthew turning the knobs up with the dramatic tension, okay? And there's a bit of it in the Sermon on the Mount. So you can see where it's coming from. Don't be like the hypocrites, which is the short term for the other guys. The other guys are hypocrites. Now, I'd have to go and check this out, but this is starting to ring bells for the language of the Dead Sea Scrolls, in terms of how they speak about the smooth talkers and the men of lies and so on. Now, it's not exactly the same word, but in sectarian Jewish, well, not just Jewish, but in sectarian religious experience, people develop pejorative terms for their opponents. And we can see that's going on here between the followers of Jesus and the officials from the synagogue. So in this case, we also get the little concordance, which lets us see what's going on. And that's the table we started with before. Okay. So if there was, I know sometimes people like to copy something like that across, and you could easily do that. If we just, okay, these are the uses, this is the way Matthew has used that. So that could be relevant. Probably, okay, we just paste it in there. And we can always go back and format it later. Shut the window. So we've started to pick some things up here just by drilling in, using the software ourselves. We've not yet gone to any commentaries or major discussions. We're just gathering basic information. So we know this is a word which is reasonably, quite rare, really. It's not a common. There are reasons for that. Only occurs 17 times in the New Testament. Interestingly, it's not a phrase Paul ever uses, a term Paul ever uses in the literature we have. He might have said it over a cup of wine, but he didn't say it in any of his letters. The letters of John will call people antichrists and false prophets, but doesn't call them hypocrites. Okay? So we're getting a feel for how this sort of thing is used, and overwhelmingly it's a Matthew word. Okay? And even within Matthew, it's particularly concentrated either in this round chapter 23, or there's another little cluster in the Sermon on the Mount. And both of those are places where Jesus is being portrayed as a sort of rabbinic teacher, like Moses. Jesus is out Phariseeing the Pharisees in the Sermon on the Mount and in 23. Yeah.
But the word itself is not limited to the Bible. It's
True. And we're going to find that out in just a second when we start going into the lexicon. However, we're only looking at its use in the Bible. Now, it may be that the way the Bible uses it is consistent with the way it's used outside the Bible, or it might be that the Bible only picks up one way of using the word, in which case we have to take that into account when we find the word in Matthew, for instance, Matthew 23. Okay? So you're right. So one of the first things we now need to do, we've worked out how often this word occurs in the New Testament, and that it's unique. It's only found in the Synoptic Gospels. Not even John uses hypocrite, and he doesn't have a lot of time for the Jewish religious leaders. But it's a Synoptic Gospel word, and it's overwhelmingly a Matthew word, and it's in Matthew. It's overwhelmingly in this bit towards the end of the Gospel where Jesus is in conflict with his opponents. So even if we didn't know anything about how it was used in other Greek literature, we'd begin to pick up from the context that this is an angry word. This is a word that involves conflict and disagreement, negative judgments and so on. So how are we going to check that out? Well, we can go back to the Greek in this case. You can do it from either the English or the Greek, but let's do it from the Greek, and let's get back into our own passage. Okay, so here's our word. And if I triple click on that, it's going to bring up by default whatever lexicon I have set as the first in my list of lexicons. If I go back to the library, okay, and go to Greek tools, at the top I've got BDAG, Bauer, Danker, Arndt and Gingrich, okay, which is this thing here, okay. Now I can move these up and down and put them in whatever sequence I want, okay. But this is the one I would choose to consult first when I'm looking at a Greek text. Okay, so I've moved it to the top of my list. Now, that won't come by default on your copy of Accordance. If you're in the library, no worries, it'll be there, but it won't necessarily be the top one. It depends who last fiddled with the preferences on Accordance in the library. Okay, and if it's your own copy of Accordance and you haven't yet bought BDAG, then it'll probably be Mounts, or it might be Thayer, be one of these other ones down here. Okay, it might be the UBS lexicon. That's the little dictionary that's in the back of your Greek New Testament. If you have a little red Greek New Testament with a dictionary, it might be, I think that's actually Thayer, same one. Or you might have Mounts' Greek Dictionary. Okay. So the first thing I can do is hit. Now this is not actually because this word is only occurs 17 times in the New Testament. It's not actually that big an entry. There are some entries that which would be a page or 2 pages long. This is just a paragraph, okay? It's just everything from that. That's it. That's the entry from BDAG. Okay, so we start going through that and just see what exactly it's telling us. So hypokritos, hypokritou, hop. Remember I said when you're learning a piece of vocab, you learn the nominative plus the genitive singular and the article. So you learn hypokrites, hypokritou, hop, hypocrite. Okay. So we find it in some of the ancient Greek texts like Aristophanes and so on. Again, if you've got your instant details open, as you go over these highlighted terms, it'll tell you what they are. So the Epistle of Aristeas, that'll be one of the apocryphal texts, because that's in the pseudepigrapha rather than the apocrypha. But yeah. But it makes the point that most generally in Greek literature, it has the sense of play actor or somebody playing a role. But in our literature, it only occurs not in the literal sense of an actor, but metaphorically as if somebody were an actor when they're not, and it's always in the sense of pretender or dissembler. Now, because this is not the Bible, this is a lexicon, okay? So in the opinion of the editors of the lexicon, this is the advice they're giving us. Now, we can still go and look up all the references, all the occurrences of the word in all the extant ancient Greek literature, which there isn't all that much actually outside of the Bible, and we could look at all the 17 occurrences in the Bible, in the New Testament, and we could form our own opinion, and we may or may not agree with them. Okay? Because opinions will change. There may be some new documents discovered. This tool will get out of date. Somebody else will publish a journal article which will demonstrate that no, BDAG is wrong, da-da-da-da-da. Okay? So just because you find it in a lexicon, and not just because Marie-Louise is sitting in the back row, but just because you find it in a lexicon doesn't mean it's gospel. But it's probably better informed than most of us are because it's a scholar who has looked at a big sample of data. And they've read all the literature up to that point when they sent their manuscript off to be printed. Okay? But don't mistake a lexicon for inspired text. It's simply a tool. So what they're telling us is that if you go through the literature, generally speaking, in ancient Greek, it simply has the literal meaning of an actor. Okay? Somebody who's pretending in a positive sense to do something. But within the biblical text, it's always used in a metaphorical sense of he's just pretending. He's faking it. He's not sincere. He's not real. Has that negative kind of connotation. Okay? And then they quote some literature and so on to try and back up that point. Now we might want to go and look at some other dictionaries. So instead of just looking at BDAG, notice up in the top, it's telling me which tool I'm in. Okay? And so I can just choose to go down. I can go to mounts, which will be much shorter. Here's his definition. Okay? GK number 5695, Strong's number G523, 5273, Hippocrates, 17 times. The giver or an answer or response, a stage player, an actor. In the New Testament, a moral or religious counterfeit, a hypocrite. So that's Mounts is cut to the chase way of summarising in our literature, always in a negative sense. Okay? Now again, I can, if I wanted to copy that for my, oops, what did I do there? Let's come back to this one. Oh, I double-clicked on religious. That was clever. Okay. Or I can just copy and paste that. If I want to quote Mounts in my essay, there he is. Now, of course, I've got to remind myself that that's Mounts. Okay, so just make a note to myself so I know what it is I've just pasted in. Again, it's given me the Mounts Greek Dictionary. Suppose I wanted to go into the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. This is like a 10-volume set of books, blue covered. They were the resources to die for when I was a theological student. They're now out of date, but they have lots of useful information buried in them. Now this article goes from it's volume 8, and it goes from page 559 to 570, so it's about 10 pages long. So Mounts gives you one line. Theological Dictionary of the New Testament gives you 10 pages of discussion on the word Hippocrates and all the related words that go with it. Okay, so it's an incredible resource. This is where you'll get to the stuff Voldemar was talking about. So it starts off in classical and Hellenistic Greek. Okay, how was this word used? Give you examples and so on. Okay, and by the way, it's telling you as you're going through what page number you're up to, which is interesting because that's a different way of numbering from what I was using. Then you come down to the New Testament, and in the Synoptic tradition, this group, as in the Septuagint, so we went back to the Septuagint for a moment. Sorry, here we go, just that one paragraph. There's 2 or 3 lines there about the use of this word in the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Bible. Okay. 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 And then he's also picked up when this word is used in Philo and Josephus. Now Philo is alive, sort of overlaps with Jesus and Paul. Okay, he's at his prime in the 40s and 50s. So he's a significant Jewish intellectual based in Alexandria in Egypt in the early decades of the 1st century, and he's probably dead before the Jewish war breaks out. Okay, so he's more or less a contemporary of Jesus. Okay, had Jesus not been crucified in the year 30, he would have been around in the 40s or 50s or whatever. But I mean, so they're more or less contemporaries. Josephus is a younger contemporary of Paul, if you like, because Josephus is the officer in charge of the Jewish forces in the Galilee in 66, where the war breaks out, and he ends up living on a government pension in Rome after the war, having changed sides during the war, and sucked up to the emperor, and he's still alive in the 90s at the end of the 1st century. So between Philo and Josephus, we get two kind of time capsules of how Hellenized Jews who were highly integrated into Roman society, how they were using Greek to express their ideas and their faith and so on. So it's interesting to see how they use this word. And then we get in the New Testament, how is it used? And there's not much. Okay, now bear in mind what they're talking about in the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament is not only the word hypocrites. Come back to the top. Okay, they're looking at all of these words. So you got hypocrinomai, to judge or to critique, sunupokrinomai, hypocrisis and hypocrites, which is our word, and anupokritos, okay, without hypocrisy. So there's a cluster of words which are being discussed here, and that's why you wouldn't have picked up all of them, because it's not just, there are like 5 different terms here, all of which belong to the one sort of one group of cognates, okay? So that's, and the reason I'm highlighting that is it's talking here about 1 Timothy 4:2, but that's not hypocrites. It's a related term, but it's not our word, okay? So if you are using Theological Dictionary in the New Testament, make sure you're only zeroing in on the bits which are relevant to your word. Otherwise you could slip across and start talking about a related term, but not the actual term. What you will get from the Theological Dictionary New Testament, and there's a similar tool for the Old Testament, okay, Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, you'll get this fulsome discussion, which you won't get in a lexicon, okay, because it's not just the lexicon, it's a theological dictionary. You could also look up Lauer and Nida, which will focus more on the semantic domains. Again, it's very, very short. It's only 2 lines, okay? So again, you could easily copy that and you could paste it into your thing, but again, you want to put up in the front Lauer and Nida just to remind yourself what you're doing, okay? So see how you can sort of you can tap in, use your tools to tap in and get different sense of how the word is being used. Now I've chosen a word that's not particularly complicated, but that was so we could focus on the process rather than getting overwhelmed with all the different interpretive possibilities. Okay, so we've done a key search. We've searched by key number, we've identified the number of occurrences, we've seen the distribution, we've noticed the concentrations in not only in Matthew but in a particular part of Matthew. We've gone into the dictionaries or the lexicons and actually got a sense of the definition of how this word is being used. Okay? So we should be able to go back into our Word document and with these rough notes that I've been taking, I've only got 600 words to play with anyway, we now start to write up and describe that data which we've been collecting. Some of it you may want to represent as a table or as a list or as a graphic. Others you will actually have to use words and actually write sentences and describe what's going on. Okay. Now you may also find it helpful to go into a commentary, and that's where, for instance, if you go into the word biblical commentary, there's a couple of ways of getting there. I can just type in Matthew 23:23. I think it was in verse 23, wasn't it? Yeah. From memory? Yes. Yeah, it was in verse 23. So I can just type in Matthew 23:23 and it'll take me straight away to that part of the commentary. Okay? And as I noticed down here, it's telling me the volume number and the page number. So that's the point where the page number would change in the print edition. So if I'm quoting it, I just look for the little bit of green and see whether I'm quoting from page 653 or 654 or whatever. Okay? Hypocrite. Okay, this is where he's going to be, this bit through here is where he's going to be talking about it. So probably about there. Okay, I'm just going to, for the sake of making it easy to say, I'm just going to copy that across. Okay, so this is a little bit out of the word commentary. Hypocrites, 5 further occurrences in this passage, 15:23, which elsewhere in Matthew is generally used for the Pharisees. Describes those who play act or who want to appear to be something they're not. See the comment on 6:2. Okay, so back in chapter 6, verse 2, where hypocrite first turned up in the Sermon on the Mount, he's presumably discussed that in more detail. Okay. The sense in which these persons are hypocrites, is that their real motivation in their apparently pious conduct is self-glorification, so that they may be glorified by others, okay, in the synagogues and in the streets, that is, in the places of worship in the public. And then we've got this nice little quote from Lutz. The word hypocrites in Hellenistic Greek commonly meant actor, that is, one who performs in front of others, pretending to be something he or she is not. In the New Testament, it is used consistently in a negative sense. Matthew captures the duplicity inherent in hypocrisy when he juxtaposes a word with the quotation of Isaiah 29:13. This people honours me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In addition to the 3 references in this section of Matthew, the word occurs in da-da-da-da-da. Okay. Now, if I want that, I can go right-click, copy as, and copy as citation, and it should actually bring across the reference in the book as well. Let me just see. Okay, so this time when I put it in, it actually also gives me the details for the reference. See down here, Donald Hagner, Matthew 1-3, Word Biblical Commentary, Volume 33A, page 139. So by doing copy as citation, rather than simply copy, it's not only taken the paragraph, but it's also taken the actual reference with it at the same time. Okay? Which you can then put into a footnote, you can put in your bibliography, whatever. Okay? It's so easy being a student these days. I mean, it's served up to you on a plate, isn't it? Eh?
Okay, you've got the concordance, I suppose.
Well, this, I mean,
If you haven't
yeah,
got it, I mean,
sure.
going through this and seeing.
Sure, if you're using, because all the things I'm doing here, I could have a stack of books around me on the dining room table. Okay? But then I'd be making notes and copying where I got it from, and I had to buy the book or borrow it in the first place.
With the using concordance in the library, how do you do it on that computer? Is there a Word document?
Oh, okay, good question. If you're doing this on the iMac in the library, okay, and you want to save this stuff, well, firstly you have a USB, because you're going to want to save it onto a USB or email. Easiest thing is the USB when you're using the library one, and you just run. There'll be a thing called text editor. It depends what, I can't remember what. We haven't got Microsoft Word, I don't think, on that machine because it would cost several $100 to put a couple $100 to put it on. I think it has OpenOffice.
Yes.
It also has Pages, which is a Mac word processor, and it has a thing, this one here called Text Edit. Okay, so for instance, that thing I just pasted before, I can paste it into Text Edit. I can save that onto my USB and then put it back onto my home computer. Okay, so even if you're working on the iMac in the library, you're getting information, taking your notes, you paste it into a Word document or an OpenOffice document or a text edit document or whatever, and then you stick it on your USB and take it home and put it back on your computer. Yeah, no, that's fine. These are exactly the sort of questions, and people that aren't here tonight but are listening, watching the video will thank Quinn for that. And I could do the same thing with the New Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible. Okay, and let's go the other way. I can click on this. I can go, I guess it's in here. Here we go, Gospel of Matthew, chapters 1-12. Actually, we want 23, don't we? So here we go, Matthew 23. So I can go down and see if there's stuff there that's going to be useful for my essay. Now, it may be in the comment on the verse, it may be something back up here, where they're offering some theological perspectives on the passage and doing a commentary. There might be something there that you want to use in your interpretation section. So, okay, suppose we're just picking this. Suppose those were the 3 or 4 sentences we really, really loved. Okay, I do copy as citation, come back into my Word document for my essay. I go to the end where I'm doing my interpretation section and I paste it in. Okay, and I can make it pretty and format it and all the rest, but but there's the passage and it's brought across because I did copy as citation. It's brought across all the reference detail for me as well.
So citations you use smaller.
Well, if I was going to have that as a quoted text, I'd have it smaller than 12 point. But that's the playing around you do at the last stage. Okay, and if I wanted to turn that into a footnote, that's easy enough done. I just come up here, document elements, insert footnote. Okay, it's going to put a footnote at the bottom, and I would edit that to make it have the stuff in the right sequence. And in the bibliography, if I was using in the bibliography, of course, it becomes boring first, boring M. Eugene, okay, and so on. And you turn the details around so it fits the right format for whether you're using APA or Chicago, you've got to format it the way you want it. Now, if you've already got this entry in EndNote, okay, like, for instance, I know I've got Lutz because I saw it earlier today. Okay, here's Lutz's commentary. So that's the format down here if it's APA. Okay, so I can just paste it in. Okay, and it's in correct APA format. However, if I'm using Chicago, then I simply change this to Chicago footnote, and this time it looks like that. Now I haven't had to change anything other than tell it I want it in APA, I want it in Chicago footnote. Okay, and automatically the information is rearranged, copy paste, and there's a quick and dirty bibliography. All right, so all we've done there at this stage is we've identified the word, we've done a simple parsing of it using the instant details. Along the way, we've realised we need to look up and see what an evocative is. Okay, we've then used look up the key number to see how many times it occurs, where it occurs, patterns of distribution, whether it's always translated with the same English word, which it is in this case. We've then gone into the lexicons and the dictionaries to get a sense of how is this word used generally in Greek literature and how is this word used within the biblical literature. Are there differences or nuances? And that'll depend on the word. Okay. As it happens in the case of hypocrites, it only picks up the negative sense of the word, which is interesting. And we're along the way we're beginning to also see how we can go into the commentaries and grab material, some of which we want to use for our word study, some of which we might want to use when it comes to the interpretation section. Okay. Now what I'd like to do is to switch across to actually doing just the straight parsing part of the exercise, which in a sense we've already done, but let's just remind ourselves how to do it. So here are our 5 words for parsing: grammates, apodekatute, eleos, poiesai, and tufloi. Okay? So let's just go through those one at a time. Accordance, too many toys. Didn't say that. Okay, so we won't need all this stuff open. All right, so this is the first of the words we're going to look at. Okay, grammatis. So we can, as we saw with hypocritai, it's a noun, it's masculine, it's vocative, and it's plural. Okay, so I'm going to go option, click, that brings up the little window, and come back in here. At this stage, I'm just going to paste it in, okay? Because I can always come back and format it later. Okay, let's go and do the same thing with apodecatute, which is here. So I'm going to hold down Option, click, go to Clipboard, come over here. Yeah.
What do you mean by option?
Option is a button on the Mac. It'll be it's probably Alt if you're using Windows version of Gordon's. It's probably Alt. Well, I've got Control, Option, Command. Okay,
So what are you doing? Just copy?
it's to make extra options turn up on the screen. So in the case of
Alt.
so it's probably the Alt key. Okay, I mean Mac users, Windows users really are like Greeks and Latins who have some common words but don't always speak to each other clearly. All right, so what have we got here? Let's look at it and just unpack it a bit. Apodecatute. All right, it's a nice tongue twister of a word. It actually means to tithe, to tenth something. Okay, and the lexical form is going to be apodecatoo. So you may or may not remember that's one of those, when the omega at the end of the lexicon form of the verb has a short vowel in front of it, it's either a-o or e-o or o-o, those verbs will contract and the little vowel will get swallowed up by the big O. Okay? But when you find it in the dictionary, they unpack it and give you the correct form of the word. So the lexical form, the dictionary form, is apodecatoo, and it's a compound word made up of two words: apo, preposition, meaning from, and deca, meaning 10. So to make a tenth of, basically, or to tithe. Okay, it's a verb. That's the part of speech, a verb. It's present tense, it's indicative mood, and it's active voice. All right, now remember we talked about all that stuff about 2 weeks ago. So present tense, it's more about continuing activity. Okay, it's indicative, which means it's not expressing a wish, it's not expressing a command. It's simply describing a state of reality, whether it's true or false, but it's describing an everyday occurrence. And it's active, not middle or passive. So you're going to be tithing, not being tithed by somebody else. Okay? So you people, you scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, you tithe the things that don't matter, and you don't pay attention to the things that do matter, because Jesus is saying, okay? Now, we're not doing a word study on it. All we've got to do is parse it, okay? So, but because it's present tense, the implication is this is the kind of thing you're doing. You're continually doing this. Not you've just done it once or whatever, or you used to do it. You have done it, and it's still in effect, okay? This is your persistent, recurrent, continuing action because it's present tense. All of that, okay, came out of those couple of words. So that's what's in here. Not quite sure why the extra H is there. Elios, okay, mercy. Let's go back and look at that one. This word down here, Elios, okay. So you can see the details over there on the top corner of the screen. Elios, it's a noun, it's a neuter noun, it's accusative, it's singular, and it means mercy. Okay? And the reason Elios and Elios look the same is because neuter nouns, remember, the nominative and the accusative are identical. So you can't tell by looking at it whether it's nominative or accusative. You only tell by the way it's being used in the sentence. Okay? And even then, the fact that it's got tot as the article actually doesn't help you either, because the article is the same whether it's nominative or accusative. Okay? But it's in a series. Note you've got tain, chrisein, kai to elios, kai tain pistain. You've got 3 terms in a row, all of them functioning in the same way, and 2 of them are obviously accusative, aren't they? Right? Tain chrisein, that's clearly an accusative ending, and tain piston, faithfulness or faith, that's also accusative. So given that it's tain chrisein, kai to elios, kai tain piston, all 3 of them are going to be the same case. And this one, elios, could be either morphologically, in terms of shape, it could be either nominative or accusative. But in this context, it's clearly accusative, because it's one of 3 direct objects that they should have been focusing on. All right, so in this case, I'm going to come back into here. In my case, I'm going to go Option, hold down Option, then click on it, and then I'm going to click on the little clipboard. I don't know how that translates into the to Microsoft. There's nothing more irritating than a Mac tragic. Okay, and the next word we have to look at was poiesai. Okay, which is a bit further down. Not that far down. Oh, yeah, there it is, yeah. Okay. All right, so again, it's coming up in the right-hand side of the screen for you. Now, poiesai is a verb, tells us that. The form of the verb you'll find in the lexicon is poieo, so it's another one of those contracted verbs, an eo verb. Okay, and actually this is the first time we've seen the difference it makes. See, in poiesai you've got an eta with a circumflex over it. Okay, so the 4th letter in is not an e but an a, the eta, and it has a circumflex over the top. That used to be an epsilon. That's the e on poieo. Okay, and then you're going to, because this is because of the form of, this is an aorist infinitive, the aorist infinitive ending is psi, sigma, alpha, iota. And so it's going to be poiesai, but that's too hard to say in Greek, so the et becomes a, poiesai. Okay? Whereas if it wasn't an eo verb, it would just be poisai. But the et stays there, but it actually stretches when other things are put on the other end of it. And that will occur in the future and in various other forms of the verb. So these contracted verbs look okay sometimes in the simple forms, but once you start to get them into other tenses, the little vowel comes back. It's still there, and when it's not being swallowed up by the omega, you've actually got to do something with it. Okay, and mostly it'll lengthen. Okay, when that happens, you'll get a little circumflex over the top, which tells you something funny has happened here. Okay, so poiesai is simply the infinitive, but the aorist infinitive of to do or to make. So poieo is I make or I do. Poiesai is to do or to make, but it's the aorist form of the infinitive. Okay? And so they're going to suggest that in this context it means practiced. We could almost say done, but practiced. So I'm going to copy that whole definition across. Get it. Okay. Copy that into my Word file for my assignment as well, down here. And then there's only one left to go, and that's tufloi. Here, okay? Tufloi is an adjective. It's the adjective meaning blind. So it's going to be tuflos, tufle, tuflon when you're learning it. Or when you look it up in the lexicon, that's how you're going to find it. In this case, it's going to be masculine, nominative, plural.
Vocative.
Oh, sorry, vocative. Remember, nominative and vocative are the same shape most of the time. Okay, because again, he's talking to you, saying, "You blind guides," is what he's saying. Okay, he's getting into them. Okay, so that's right. So whether it's nominative or vocative, you're going to have to pay attention to the context, and if your Bible software is tagged correctly, it'll give you the correct answer there. Okay, so again, I'm going to copy that into my Word document. So I could type it out myself, and that's just as easy to do in some ways, or I can just be absolutely clear what I'm doing and I can copy and paste it over. Okay? Now I've still got to turn that into the right kind of algorithm, as it were, for a parsing statement. So I'm just going to quickly format these and make it 12 point. Okay, and then I'll just quickly go down and apply that style to all the others. And okay. All right. So what's our there's a little sort of pattern we've been using, okay? So we identified first off, we say it's a noun, we've got the part of speech. Oops. So noun, part of speech, and then we're going to say that it's, in this case, grammateis, it's going to be masculine, vocative, plural, okay, of or from, and then we're going to put in the actual word, the way you would find it in the lexicon. Okay, grammateus is how you'd actually look, that's the form it would be in the lexicon, and in its inflected form, when it's plural, masculine, nominative, it's going to mean scribes, and I would normally put that in, say, italics, just so it's like putting in inverted commas. Okay. And I guess if I was going to put in the numbers, I could just put S, G, and 11, 22, and then I don't have to have that there. Okay. I don't know. So I'll put in the Strong's reference number, put in the part of speech, noun, adjective, verb, adverb, preposition, conjunction, article, whatever it might happen to be. Then I've done the gender and the case and the number. Then I'll put the lexical form, and then I'll put what it means in its inflected form in this sentence. Okay, and then I've got to make a comment. If there is anything relevant, what does all that tell me? Okay, well that tells me, because it's vocative, it'll be the same answer as the one before actually. The vocative indicates that the scribes are being directly addressed by Jesus. Okay, that's what the vocative tells me. And you can all see how badly I type now. But if you've had emails from me, you know that already. All right, so that's an example. That's an example of taking the raw data from the Bible software, pasting it in, reformatting it into the way we would normally make a parsing statement, okay, and then putting in a simple line which just indicates what's the significance of that piece of syntax or grammar. And this is only word by word. This is not phrase by phrase. This is just word by word. It's really basic stuff. We're not looking at adverbial prepositions. We're just doing a word rather than a phrase. Okay? Walk me through the next one. Tell me what I've got to do for the next one. Come up with the same kind of thing. Okay? Apodeca tute. What am I going to do here?
Can you make it a bit bigger, please?
Sure, I can make it bigger. Ah, that's better, they said. They all sat there for an hour, squinting. All right, apodeca tute. Okay, so this is the word that occurs in the text. Okay, let's start from here. So we know that Tithe is going to be the, that's going to be what it means. That's the meaning of the inflected meaning. GO586 is the number. Okay. This word here, that's the actual word we'll just copy it rather than delete it. Okay. That's the word we're actually dealing with. Okay. Actually, that wasn't how I did it before. Let's leave that out. So it's a verb, right? We've got it up here. It's a verb. We're going to put verb, and then we can then copy this next bit across. Present tense, indicative, mood, active voice. Again, because I've set up. Now you've got to watch this. When you use the one in the library or the one that's on your computer, you may not have the preferences set up to give you the stuff in the right order, okay? I've actually gone into my, oh, hang on, I'm in the wrong program. In accordance, okay, I've gone in here and I've actually said the sequence I want things to occur in. Okay, so they occur in the order that I want. Then I don't have to stop and think as much because I don't like thinking. Okay. So when you're setting up, and when you actually got your own copy of accordance, either in a couple of weeks' time when Ken Simpson's here or some other time, we can take you through and show you how to configure the preferences. So it actually puts the data out more directly useful for you. Okay. So we've got present indicative active, second person plural, and it's from the, I'll go back and get rid of the bolds. Oh, sorry. It's this word here actually. This is the word it's coming from, and in this context it means that. I would take it out once you're actually done. This is just the raw data you brought across. So once you've finished using it and checking it, and you haven't left anything else, these are the two lines you need for the assignment. Okay. Because you've got grammar, well actually this one up here as well obviously, so I would take that one out. Okay, and I'd take that one out, and then I've still got to put in something here where I comment. So the comment, the grammatical significance here is that this is a present indicative verb, and which implies continuous action. Oh, I'm still in bold. Okay. So the present tense suggests continuous action by the scribes and Pharisees. Okay. And you could, you could comment on the fact that it's indicative rather than imperative or subjunctive, but I think the only thing that's relevant there is that it's, if it were imperative, then you'd comment on it. Being indicative, I don't think it particularly needs to be commented on. Okay? All right, and you just work your way through do the same with all the others. And what you're doing there in each case is you're bringing across the data, you're organising it into the way you want to present it, making it clear that the part of speech, the Strong's number, the part of speech, the actual parsing, the lexical form in the dictionary, and what it actually means in this inflected form, which if it's plural, it has to come across as plural. If it's genitive, you've got to indicate the genitive, putting of in brackets or something like that, okay? So you're going to bring the data across, because you find the data, bring it across, and don't feel bad about doing that. 10 years ago, we did it with a book, and we just opened Bagster, we copied it, okay? You do it often enough, you start to learn it, kind of thing. So this is just bringing it across more accurately than we used to do with Bagster. And then you reorganise it and make sure you put it into a format that's consistent, and then you have a one-liner where you indicate the significance of the syntax or whatever for what you're doing. So if it's nominative, the subject of the verb. If it's vocative, it's the person being directly addressed. If it's accusative, it's the direct object of the verb, and so on. Okay, if it's present tense, then it's continuous activity. If it's aorist, then it's probably passed, but it's unspecified. Now, has that given you a sense of what the process is for doing the assignment that you need to be doing in a couple of weeks' time?